Hey, Franny, my dear. Did you know there's an object-oriented way to get rich? What? An object-oriented way to get rich? Yeah, inheritance. Welcome to Headless WP Rocks. Today is going to be a bit of a show and tell episode. I'm going to do a detailed walkthrough of how I built and launched a real production Headless WordPress application called Run Through History. I think this is going to be a pretty cool case study. You'll be able to see how I built out the front end React application to be very responsive and interactive and provide a nice, snappy user experience to the users, and how I use the WordPress rock solid content management experience on the back end, and then use WPGraphQL to allow the two to communicate with one another. We'll get started by just hearing the story of like where the app came from and why it exists. So you're kind of familiar with it. After that, I'll give you a tour as though you're a user of the app of kind of its features and what the app can do, all the screens it has, how you interact with it, and so on. And then lastly, we'll dive into the code. I'll show you the front end app and how all of that's wired up, where it's hosted and how deploys work, how it communicates to the Headless WordPress backend. And we'll also look at that backend as well, how WordPress is set up, the custom post types and taxonomies I'm using, the custom fields I'm using, and how I'm updating the GraphQL schema to do what we need it to do for the front end app. So now let me tell you that story of how this app came to be. So I'm recording this at the end of 2020, and unfortunately for many months, the COVID-19 virus has been adversely affecting many people. And one of the groups that it's affecting is athletes, more specifically runners. A good friend of mine from college by the name of Rich runs a race company called Trivium Racing. So he puts on all kinds of 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathon, etc. runs. And he and his wife run this racing company together. And I've worked with them on a few projects in the past, but he came to me with this great idea. He said, because so many runners are unable to go to these large group events that they're used to participating in due to the virus, what if we partner up together, he and I, and put together a virtual running event? Other organizations are doing these, like big name companies like Disney and so on are doing these type of virtual events. So he thought there's a big market for that and a need for to provide the ability to do these running events to runners. So he came up with this great idea for an event called Run Through History. The idea with this event is that runners start at year 0, and then every mile that they run, that represents 1 year AD. So then as they run along the timeline of history, when they hit certain historical landmarks or milestones, they earn different things. So there's a gamification aspect to it where you can earn different badges and things as you progress through the timeline. At a certain point, you also win medals. So you win the bronze medal, then the silver, and then if you reach the end, if you reach all the way to 2020, like the present day year, then you earn the gold medal. And it's an event that runs for 12 months. It's like a full year-long event. So as runners, go out and do their runs, they can log them in this app and then see themselves progressing along the timeline and earning different medals and badges and things like that. So it's kind of fun. There's also a competitive side to it as well. So there's a leaderboard that lists, where you rank. If you're an athlete, if you're a runner participating in the event, you can see where you are as of, the current date, and then how many miles you need to go to pass, the person ahead of you and to progress, up to the top of the leaderboard, or however close you can make it. So we both thought this sounded like a great idea and something runners would enjoy doing. So we decided to go ahead and partner up and launch runthroughhistory.com. So let me give you a tour of the app next. So the front end React app lives here, runthroughhistory.com. This is a progressive web app hosted on Netlify and built using React and Gatsby and Apollo client and a few other technologies. This repo is on GitHub, so whenever I push a change to the master branch, it automatically triggers a rebuild on Netlify, and then this front end gets redeployed here. This is a progressive web app, as I said, and I have a prompt that pops up. Like if somebody is a registered user, has an account, and they've been to the site multiple times, I have a prompt that pops up that asks them if they want to install, the PWA to their home screen just for convenience. And if they do that, it looks something like this. At least on iOS it does, and similar experience for Android, where they get an icon on their device's home screen. So it's pretty cool. And then when they open that up, it looks very similar to like a native application running on the device. Even like when you use something like the iOS app switcher, it looks like this, where it gets its own icon and name, and then the screenshot, as you can see here, is like is in standalone mode, so it doesn't have like any other browser Chrome or anything like that. So to the user, it looks very similar to a native app that they would have installed via the App Store. But little did they know it's built using completely web technologies. So that's pretty cool. The backend lives here at api.runthroughhistory.com. This is a WordPress site hosted on a DigitalOcean droplet. You can see I have a few custom post types here, runs and awards. I modified the user object, so we have a few taxonomies and custom fields and things I'm using for that. So we'll take a look at all of that. Let's move away from production though, and we'll look at like my local version of the site here, just so we can make changes to it, not worry about messing up production. So this is what it looks like on a mobile device, to give you a sense of it. From here, I'm a logged out user at this point, so my choices are to go to sign in, sign up. I can, read some info about like what the event is all about here, and then click sign up, which sends me to the same place as here. So we have a few forms. If they hit sign in, they already have an account. They end up here. If they hit sign up, they can fill out the form to register as a new user. If they forgot their password, I have a forgot password flow as well. So let's take a look at that. So let me sign in here. So I'll sign into the app, hit sign in. So here we go. Now the app has recognized that I'm a logged in user, and it's re-rendered some portions of the site. So you can see this top menu has changed. Instead of sign in and sign up, it now knows I'm logged in. So it's re-rendered to just show sign out now. And I also have a brand new fixed bottom nav here. So this says home, runs, which would be like all the runs that I've logged so far, the timeline, and then the leaderboard. So we'll go through like each of these now. So home is the page we've already been to that just tells about the event. If I head over to runs here, this page is pretty cool. It's a log of all the runs that user has done throughout the whole year, and it's using infinite scroll to load this list. So at first it loads something like 5 or 10 runs, something like that, and then as the user scrolls down like this, you can see there's a momentary delay. This is much faster on production actually than is my local to load more runs. But if I keep doing this, eventually I'll reach the beginning of the year. So there it is. This is my first run I had logged when the event kicked off in early July, and then going through time, like here are all the runs that I personally logged for this event, and you can see what my total miles are. And I have the option to add a run as well. So let's do that. I'll tap add run, and it shoots over to this form. It defaults to the current date, but the user can choose like whatever actual date they did the run. They can see, they can say that they did 1.5 miles. Let's say that day, and if I hit add. All right, so I get a little toast notification here. I get a sound effect, and then things re-render. Once again, you can see my total miles now reflects that 1.5 mile run, and here it is. On December 11th, I logged a 1.5 mile run. So now it's been added to the list as well. What if I made a mistake? What if I realized, oh wait, I actually went 1.6. I want credit for that extra tenth of a mile. I want to remove this. You can hit the X right here. And I have a toast that pops up that says delete run. So if the user waits and takes no action, then that just kind of goes away and nothing happens. Otherwise, if they confirm it, so if they hit X and then say, yes, I do want to delete it. So we get momentarily it says deleting run, and then it says run deleted to confirm that change. And you can see things are re-rendered once again. So now my total miles is back to what it was before I logged that run. And then that run has been removed from my list as well. So that's pretty cool. This is how the user logs the runs that they've done throughout the year right here. Let's take a look at the timeline. This would be as they earn miles, they progress along the timeline of history and earn different things, like I said. So this is what that looks like. So here's the timeline. You can see everyone gets the start badge right here. Welcome to Run Through History. Let's get started. And then as I scroll down, I see different ones pop in. So here's Rome Burns that I earned at 64 miles right here. So I get a little description. Mount Vesuvius. And as I scroll down, you can see some of these are grayed out and just have the question marks right there. And that's because I haven't earned these yet. So I have, my mileage is above 79, but it hasn't yet reached 220. So I give the user a little teaser at this point. They can kind of see the outline, of what the badge is, but they just have question marks and, don't know exactly what that is. They can also click on these to view the single pages for these awards. So if I click on Rome Burns right here, then it opens that in a new tab right here. So you see Rome Burns, the image, and then a little description like that. So we can head back to the timeline. So that's pretty cool. That's what the timeline looks like. That's kind of the gamification aspect that we have. Let me show you what it looks like when the user earns a new badge, because it's kind of cool. So they experience something different when that happens. So right now I have 79 miles, but I need to earn 220 to get the next badge here. So let's simulate that. So back on runs, we'll say that I ran a 200-mile run on today's date. Let's just do that. So I'll hit add, and then remember, instead of just the toast notification and the little sound effect that I got last time, this time because we've earned a medal, we're going to see a different experience. So I'll hit add. Oh, let's see. I'm only allowing 100 miles at a time. It looks like I have a cap on that. So that's fine. Let's do 100. Adding. So there we go. I get our U rule. And these messages are randomized, so it makes it kind of fun. They get a different message each time they log miles successfully. All right, so now I'm up to 208. So now let's hit add run again, and this time we should earn something. So I'll say I did a 50 miler. This time I'm going to log this run, and this time I should earn the next badge. All right, so there you go. You won a new award. Congratulations. Cool. So you can see I'm presented with the new award here. I have the different toast notification and sound effects and all that kind of stuff. And then it displays the title, the featured image for this award right here, and then gives a description of what that is. So now if I go back to my timeline, it should have re-rendered as well to show that I now have earned the Hot Air Balloons in Warfare badge. Let's see if that's the case. So there's Mount Vesuvius, and sure enough, here's Hot Air Balloons in Warfare. Cool. So it knows that I've earned, at least 220 and is, showing me that badge there. So that's all pretty cool. And lastly, we have the leaderboard tab that we haven't checked out yet. So let's do that. If I tap leaderboard, this is for the competitive folks. So it knows because it knows my sex and age group. It just pulls that through in the my group tab right here. So it knows, who the others are in my age group. So it pulls them through, and you can see where I am on the list. So here's, Kellen Mace. I have 258 miles at this point, so I can see who I've, passed by, but who's still beating me, who's above me on the leaderboard. So for those real competitive folks, like I said, they want to see their card here, their username, work its way up and be, the top at the top here. I can hit all female. I'll get a loading for a second, and they'll load in, all the age groups. Maybe I have a friend doing the event, and I want to find where my friend is. I can do that in this tab, or otherwise, all the male participants. I can do the same thing and see, where they all rank. And I'll also find myself on this list. So here's my same age group that we saw in the other tab. Because I've loaded each of these once now, Apollo Client has cached that data. So now we get an even quicker transition. If I go to my group, or female or male, you can see they're very instantaneous because we've already fetched that data once. So now it's cached in memory. So that's the front end application. Next, let's take a look at our WordPress backend. So here I am on my local version of the WordPress backend, and we can take a peek at some of this stuff. So let's look at awards first, this custom post type. So this, as you can see, houses both the badges that folks can earn as well as the medals. So I decided to make these one post type just called awards, and then I have a taxonomy called award type, and that's how I distinguish which ones are a badge from the ones that are medals here. So if I go to like the Wright brothers first flight, I'll just click on that. You can see this is what it looks like. So I have, this is the title that pulls through on the front end when this badge is earned. Here's the description when it's earned. I'm using the featured image just to house this badge image. I have one custom field here that's award fields, and that's how I know, how many miles the person has to run in order to earn that badge. It also corresponds to the year that this historical event took place. And then, as I mentioned, I have the award type taxonomy right here. So it's pretty cool. I'll click on one of the badges just to see that. So like the gold medal, for instance. So this one's a bit shorter for the description. Just says, great job, title is gold medal. And that's a picture of the medal that the participants actually earn at the end of the event. They get an actual medal, METAL, medal in the mail at the end of the year. It looks like that. And they have to reach the very end of the event, 2020, in order to earn that. So that's what awards look like. I did mention that there's one custom field here for the year. So we can take a quick pause, I guess, to look at the ACF custom fields that I've put in place. So here, you can see if I go to award fields right here, there should be just that one. Yeah, so the miles required right there. And I have a few others. So for the run post type that we'll see next, there's miles and date. So I'm using ACF, as I mentioned, advanced custom fields for that. And let's take a quick glance at the plugins while we're on that topic. So we'll see advanced custom fields at the top of the list right there. Let's glance through the rest that I'm using here. So this is the core plugin for all the custom functionality for this app. So we'll dig through what that looks like a little later. Beyond those, I have a few others. So the front end app is built on Gatsby. So I have this WP Gatsby plugin here, and this helps the Headless WordPress backend integrate well with Gatsby. I have WP GraphQL, which creates that GraphQL schema that we're then tweaking and modifying and ultimately using to talk to our decoupled front end. I have WP GraphQL for advanced custom fields, which kind of bridges the gap between this plugin and this plugin. It just exposes all the ACF custom fields in the GraphQL schema so that now you can have queries that include them. For the authentication of users on the site, I'm using WP GraphQL JWT authentication. So I'll go through that in a little more detail as well. And then WP GraphQL tax query, because I want to be able to run some taxonomy-based queries from our front end. So this plugin allows me to do that. That's kind of a tour of the plugins. Let's head back to where we left off then with the post type. So we had touched on awards, but we haven't seen runs yet. So this would be when the user's on this page and they hit add run, and then they add a new one with the date and miles right here. This is the data we're actually storing for those. So since this event kicked off, as you can see, we've had a lot of participation. We have close to 21,000 runs that our 200 and something runners have logged. So here's the last two that I just made during this little app walkthrough. So we can click on one of those to see an example. So you can see I have some ACF fields here to capture, the miles that the person said that they did that day, the date that they did them. I'm using the author to identify who the person is who logged these miles. And beyond that, I'm just setting the title. This isn't displayed anywhere in the front end app. This is just more for convenience, for myself or my friends Rich and Libby, who own the race company. If any of us are here looking in the admin, it just makes it easy for us to quickly scan the list of runs here and tell who it was and the date they logged it, just for convenience. So that was awards and runs. Let's take a look at the user objects, because I made some changes to those as well. So I'll find myself on the list, and we'll take a look here. So it's the typical WordPress profile page here, but if we scroll down a bit, we'll see some of my custom fields. So here we go, user fields. So here are the total miles that this user me in this case, have earned. And this gets recalculated. So every time a user either adds or deletes a run, I have some code that sweeps through all of the run post types with that person as the author, and it just adds up all of the miles and then comes up with the total and resets this total amount right here. This makes it very quick on the front end when we're doing our leaderboard page. So when we need to pull a list of users and then all of the totals, I have these totals already pre-calculated, ahead of time and saved in this field. So that makes it really quick to query for that data, since it's already, I don't have to do any math on the fly to calculate those. It's already saved. I have that person's date of birth, city, state from when they registered, and then the sex and the age group as well. So the age group gets set automatically. I don't actually ask the person this when they register. What I do is I just ask for their date of birth right here, and then using the date of birth, I'm able to calculate how old is this person, and then I set this for the user. So in WordPress, WordPress actually has the ability to have user taxonomies, but they're not first-class citizens. They're not fully supported. So what I mean by that is, like, it's possible to register a new taxonomy and say that that taxonomy applies to the user object in WordPress. But WordPress, unlike for post types, WordPress doesn't give you any screens to manage those taxonomies for users, and it doesn't do like recalculating the number of terms saved, things like that you get for free when you register taxonomies for post types. You don't get those for users, but that capability is there. And I took full advantage of this for this app because I actually have the sex and age group right here. Both of these are taxonomies, and I'm able to quickly query for users within those groups. And that's how I do these groupings right here. So if I need to group people by both sex and age group, like this tab, I'm able to quickly do that, or just by all female, all male. Having these taxonomies applied makes that very quick. So that's what the WordPress backend looks like. So with that, I think we can dive into some of the code. So let's head back to the front end here, our front end application, and we'll take a look at the Gatsby and React app that's used to power this next. So here I am in the front end app code base here, and this is a Gatsby application. So I'll walk through a few of the kind of key features here. This app, you may think of Gatsby as being used primarily for sites that are largely static content, and less so for applications, but it's actually a really great fit for this project because I had some content that I needed to be static and fetched at build time, like all of my awards, since those are the same for every user. And then everything else, it made sense to just fetch on the client side. So anything particular to that user, like their runs that they had logged, or their medals they had earned, all of that is just fetched on the client once I know who that person is and they've logged in and so on. So in the front end app, if I go to the Gatsby config right here, you can see the plugins I'm using. So let's take a look at some of these. So Gatsby plugin manifest, this is the one where you specify some attributes of your app, and based on these, it knows how to present your app as a progressive web application. So this is what specifies like this logo that I'm choosing here, or icon rather. That's where this comes from. So if the user saves it to their home screen, it knows where to grab that icon, and I have the short name as run THRU history, just because I couldn't fit this all in one line right there. So that's how it knows how to display that text, for instance, when the user saves it to their home screen. So that's kind of cool. I'm using styled components for styling this app. So I have that. I have a custom web font I'm using as well for that, for all my headings. So that's this kind of like hand hammered or chiseled looking font that I have right there. I'm loading that in as a custom font just locally here inside of a fonts directory. So I have that plugin going. And this one's important, Gatsby Source WordPress Experimental. So this is the new version of the Gatsby Source plugin for WordPress. Eventually, I think this is going to be renamed to Gatsby source WordPress, and the old one will be deprecated, and this one will be used going forward. For now, though, it still has the word experimental in the name. And for this plugin, you have to specify the URL of the WordPress backend right here. So you can see I have process.env and then this gatsby underscore WPGraphQL URL here. So this can be passed in a couple ways. So you can see I have this code at the top that requires a .env.development file. So if you're working locally and that file is defined, that's where Gatsby knows where to pull the URL from. So you can see I'm just pointing it to my local environment while I work locally. Otherwise, on Netlify, there is no .env file locally here. Instead, I have this set as an environmental variable on Netlify. So at build time, that's present and it's set to the production WordPress backend so that it queries from the correct backend there. And you can kind of disregard this. I just have some stuff that I don't need to query at build time. So I'm just preventing this source plugin from even adding these to the GraphQL schema, because these are things that I either don't use for the app or I query them at runtime on the client. So I don't actually need the plugin to do those. So that's why I'm excluding them here. I found that makes my builds that I do locally a bit faster. So let's see. So next, let's take a look at one of our pages. So how about just the home page here? We'll start with that one. So if I open up the source directory and go to pages, that would be my index.js. So it looks like this. It's kind of short and sweet. I have this layout component that wraps all the pages in my app. I have some SEO that sets like the document title shown in the browser tab there. And I just have two components on this page, a hero and a description. So that's kind of this section is the hero, and then below is the description that has the sign up button in it. So kind of short and sweet. Let's dive into layout a bit though, because we have some interesting functionality that goes on there. So this is what layout looks like. So I have this use auth hook that I'm calling that can tell if the user is signed in, and then if they are, I render that extra fixed navigation at the bottom. So that's this one that sits at the bottom. So when the app first loads up, that's not there. And as soon as the person is authenticated, then that extra bottom nav pops up and they have access to those things like that. So you can take a look at this hook right here. We'll look at authentication stuff next. That might be interesting. So we'll do that. I'll click in the use auth hook and that sends me here. So inside of my hooks directory, I have use auth and it looks something like this. So there's a fair amount going on here. I have this auth provider right here that's using Apollo client to run this query right here that gets some data stored just locally on the client. So this isn't like some external GraphQL API we're querying. This is just local state that we've saved via Apollo. So this query queries for that. And then with that data can tell if the user's logged in, and if so, who that user actually is. And it passes that data down to anywhere in the app that needs it. So from anywhere, we can destructure the value that use auth gives us and pull off of that info. We can get signed in like we just saw right here, right? In this case, that's all we needed. You can also pull off of this some other info as well, like who that user is, if you need info about them, and then a few other functions if you want to be able to set the auth data for that person or delete the auth data for that person. So let's take a look at this hook in a second. Before we do that, though, I want to look at the Apollo file because there's actually a fair amount going on in this app for authentication. So for this Apollo app right here, or apollo.js file here, something a bit interesting at the top here. So you can see I have persisted auth data. So I'm saying if this is the browser, meaning it's not build time on Netlify servers, if we're actually running in a browser, if that's true, then get the persisted auth data, which we're storing in the user's browser, pull that. Otherwise, if this is build time, just set this to null. So what we do with this persisted auth data is we use Apollo's reactive variables feature. So I'm using this make var function that Apollo client provides, and I'm initializing it to an object that looks like this. So I'm saying auth token, set to null, refresh token. If we had persisted data, use that, otherwise null. And then the user who's logged in, if we have that, use that, otherwise set that to null. And I'm not storing the auth token locally, just for a little added security. So what we do is when the app first loads up, I try to grab the refresh token and the user's details that we knew the last time the app loaded up. And using that refresh token, then we're able to send our query to the backend and actually get and set this auth token so we know who they are. So we have all that going on. So this gets initialized here. And I also have in Apollo's in-memory cache, I have one custom field that I'm adding on here. So if anywhere in my app I query for Apollo auth data, I'm returning the value of this reactive variable object that I had set right here. So there's that. All right, this one's important as well. So refresh auth token if it is expired. So this one does just what it says. So it can tell if the auth token is valid or undefined. It then calls fetch access token and just uses the browser's native fetch right here to try to get a new auth token. And then if we're able to do that, then it sets that. So you can see I'm calling set auth data, and actually uses the new token that came back and saves that, so that ultimately gets updated here in this reactive variable right there, as well as that use auth hook that we saw previously in both of those places. Since they ultimately behind the scenes, they all reference this reactive variable here. So in all those places, the user is now logged in and we know who they are. So for all this auth token refresh stuff, I'm using a npm package called Apollo Link Token Refresh. So I just followed the documentation for that package, and I was able to piece this all together and get JSON web token refreshes going on in my app. This one's critical as well. So as I mentioned, we have to include the token in the headers of every request back to the server, so we know who that person is. So that's what this Apollo link does here. So I'm using Apollo auth data to grab the data in that reactive variable and pull out the auth token. And then you can see the headers. I'm just spreading any existing headers that were already on this request. I'm still including those, but in addition, I'm tacking on this authorization header and saying if we have an auth token, then use that for that header. Otherwise, just make it an empty string. So this one's important. This is how we're able to authenticate the user on every request in the first place. What else do we have? Every time a request is successful and the response comes back, the WPGraphQL JWT plugin, let me pull that back up. This that authenticates the user, every time a request is successful, it actually sends back new auth and refresh tokens as well. So that's why I have for this Apollo link right here, I'm saying when a response is sent back from the headers, get the new auth token here, as well as the new refresh token, and pull those off. And then if I was able to get this one, then great, go ahead and save it. If I was able to get the refresh token, then great, save that. So that just extends the life of those, because there's a certain time limit or a certain expiration date that these tokens have. And if you're refreshing them on every successful request, you're just kind of bumping that time limit with every request so that you don't have to refresh them quite as often. So this is kind of a nice little addition right here. All right, and last one, I just have what what Apollo client calls the terminating HTTP link right here. So this is the one that actually takes all the other links after they've done their work. This terminating HTTP link right here goes ahead and fires off that request. So you can see I'm telling it for the URI, also use that WP GraphQL backend that we had set, use that same thing. And then for fetch right here, rather than using the browser's fetch, I'm actually getting this from this NPM module, node fetch right here. And I'm doing that because then fetch can be used both at build time as well as on the client. So when this app is being rendered at build time on Netlify servers and encounters calls to fetch, they work without a problem. So there's a lot there. Let's go back to where we started though. So we started looking at pages and then index, and inside of layout here, that's how we got it talking about all of the auth stuff. There's one last thing on authentication I wanted to show, and that was this use auth token refresher. So this hook right here. This just has a use effect that figures out if we should refresh the person's auth token, and if so, fires off a request to do that and saves the new auth token. So remember when we were going through that apollo.js file, I mentioned that we only persist 2 of these, the refresh token and the user, but this one was null. I have that other hook, this one, the use auth token refresher. It's the one that as soon as the app boots up and we see that we have a refresh token, but we don't have an auth token, it's the thing that actually triggers that request and then gets this thing set initially. So put a lot of work into like figuring out how to wire all this up, but now I have authentication working really well. So the user can sign in, sign out, sign up as a new user on the site. They can request a password reset email to be sent to them, and that gets sent to them, and they can also click the link in the email to then perform a password reset. All of that stuff I have set up, as well as this client-side stuff to do the token refreshing and so on. So there's a lot there. So with that, let's circle back then to our front-end app. So we started with the homepage here and then got into talking about all of our authentication stuff. Let's head back to the next tab in our app though. So that would be like the runs tab right here. Let's see what that looks like. So inside of pages, I'll go to runs. So this one, I have this styled page wrap with some styles. And then I have this content. Oh, auth content is another one. Related to authentication. This is a component I have that is very simple. It just checks if the person's logged in and should have the ability to view this auth content, then great. Show them the children, whatever is nested inside of this component. That's what they're allowed to see. Otherwise, if they're not signed in, show them the sign up page instead. So I use this as kind of a guard, to wrap any content that requires authentication in the app. So on the runs page, I have my styles wrapper here. I have my authentication, my auth content wrapper here. And then inside of that is the runs H1, a div, and then the different sections of the page. So here's our runs total. And then for this total miles section, I have that here. It's pretty short and sweet. I have a hook use total miles that is used to calculate that. It looks like this. So it runs a query that looks like this. So the viewer, the person who's currently logged in, it gets the user fields and then the total miles for that person. And that's how it has the data that we need to display in that section. And then I have a link to add the run. That's my yellow button right here. And then after that, we have the runs list. And this is the one I mentioned has infinite scroll. So if the user goes down, they see the gray area momentarily. It's much faster on production, as I said, compared to my local here, but that infinite scroll is done in this runs list component. So that looks like this. So here it is. I'm using this infinite scroll library from NPM right here, React Infinite Scroller. And that one, I just tell it, if we have any more to load right here, then it knows if there are more pages exist. I give it a function to call when we want to load more. So it can go ahead and call that. For the loader to use as a placeholder while we're working on loading in new ones, I just have this like that grayed out little skeleton card that I'm passing in for that. And then inside of all that, I just map over the runs, and for each of them I register this run component here, and that's how I get the card look just like that. So that might be it for that page. Let's see if there's anything else interesting here to check out. Could just look at this get runs query, I suppose. That looks like this. So when you actually fire off the query to get runs, we're telling our backend like where to start querying. So that means if we fetch the first 10, then we would say, give me the first 10, but don't start from the beginning. Instead, get the first 10 after the 10th one that we had gotten. So get numbers 11 through 20 or whatever. And we're also passing in the user ID, so it knows who to query for. And then that data comes back. We're saying, do we have a next page? If so, what's the end cursor for that the last page on the current page? And then also for each of our runs, we're getting all of the data about that run here. Next, let's check out some of the functionality for adding and removing runs. So in our front-end application, we have the yellow button here, add run. So when the user clicks that, they're presented with this form. And then when they fill it out, we fire off a GraphQL request to save a new run post type for that person. So let's take a look at that. So if I go to the add run page right here, I'll take a glance at that. So this, all right, so this is the first time we've seen this. So we're getting some data that we fetched at build time here. So our app gets this awards data, and then it uses that to determine, after a run has been added, if the person has now earned the next badge or earned the next medal, or if they've not yet earned it. And then based on that, it knows, what messaging and what sounds to show and play for the user. So let's take a look at that real briefly. So if you're familiar with Gatsby at all, this should look pretty familiar. So if I go to Gatsby node right here, in this file, we can take a look at what we're doing inside of create pages here. So you can see I have a few pages that actually care about this award data. So I have templates for each of them. And I have this query called awards query that grabs all the data that we care about for each of our awards. So just as a reminder, in our backend, like award was this post type right here. And then for each one of these, we have these details that we want to query. So what I'm doing is, rather than do this at runtime in the browser when the user is using the app, because these awards are the exact same for all users who visit the app, I just do them ahead of time on the server at build time. Because our front end is a Jamstack application, and I can fetch that data ahead of time. So this is what the query for that looks like. The WP Gatsby plugin that provides this field called all WP award. So you can query that, and as its name suggests, it gets you, all of the posts within that post type. So I'm querying for that, and I'm getting the database ID, aka the post ID, the slug where it lives. That's how I know how to build the pages. So if somebody, navigates to a page like this, you can see I'm getting the slug, and I'm using that to build my URLs like that. For the award fields, I'm getting the miles required to earn that particular award. And then this is the award types taxonomy. So I'm getting the slug for that. So again, back in our admin, that would be this. So the miles we saw a second ago, and then the award type would be this one, whether it's a badge or a medal. So that's how I'm distinguishing which is which right there. And then for our featured image, I'm getting all of this stuff, the source URL, alt text, and so on for our featured image. I'm getting some of these sizes so that I can make them responsive images. So if the user's on a very small mobile device, it'll just pull down a small version of the image. Otherwise, if they're on a large device, it'll get the high res version and so on. So I run that query at build time, and if there are any errors, I throw the error there. Otherwise, if there are not, I do a little light data processing here in this format and sort awards code right here. I'm just making a few little tweaks to that so it's formatted the way I want for my front end app. And after that's done, after I'm done making a few tweaks to that awards data, I then go ahead and create the 3 pages. So you can see my comments here, create the add run page. So create a page at that route. I say for that page, I want to render this particular component. And here's the data to pass down to that page so that it has it ready to go. So you can see I'm passing down the awards to that page. Likewise, I'm creating the timeline page, giving it a route component, passing down awards, and then lastly, create individual award pages. So for each individual award, I'm saying what's the slug for this thing, and then create a path that looks like this, award / whatever the slug is. That's what we saw here, award / Rome Burns. That's where that route comes from. It's built right here. And then same thing, choosing which template to use for that, and then passing down the awards data for that page. Yeah, so that's all the data that's fetched at build time and then passed down to a few of my pages. So back to the add run page then. So in our app, if I navigate back to runs and then add run, so this form right here, let's take a look at what that looks like. So here's the add run page. And then inside of that, the add run form. And I'm passing down that awards data that we had got at build time. I'm passing that through to this add run form component here. So let's take a look at that. So this, just some interesting stuff. We'll take a look at all of this. Let's first go down to the markup though to see what we're actually rendering out. So you can see I have this styled form right here, and then a form submit handler right there. So we'll take a look at that function. And inside of that, just my date input right there, my miles input right there, and then just handling like if an error has occurred, displaying that nicely, and then the submit button at the bottom. So the text changes if we're currently loading. The text on the button re-renders to say adding ... or otherwise if we're not loading, then it just says add. So that'd be this button down here. So let's glance through this a bit. So it's a pretty straightforward form right here. And then on submit, as I said, I'm calling this handle submit function. So let's take a look at that. So here's handle submit. What actually happens when you type stuff into these fields and then hit the add button. This is what gets triggered here. So I'm calling prevent default on that. And I'm just firing off a create run GraphQL query and passing a few things through to it. So I'm saying this client mutation ID is just a unique identifier that's required for all GraphQL mutations. So not too much to worry about there. Beyond that, though, I'm passing through the date and also the miles for this GraphQL query. When we look at our WordPress backend, we'll see how I'm doing this, how I'm extending the schema that WPGraphQL provides to us for creating posts of type run right here to not only include things that WordPress natively knows about, like the title and who the author is or whatever, but how I'm extending it to also have fields to add the miles and the date, like we're doing here. So we'll see how that's done in the backend. When the user submits the form, this is all I'm doing, preventing the defaults and then firing off the create run mutation. So let's take a look at that. I'll jump to create run, and that looks like this. So I'm using this use mutation that I get from Apollo client right there. I'm calling that, and then I'm passing into it this tagged template literal that I've built up here called create run. So this thing takes the three things that we just saw a moment ago. It takes the client mutation ID, the date the run took place, the miles for that run, and then using those three variables, it fires off this query and then passes each of those through. And you can see I'm setting them to be published posts because the default is draft in WordPress. So I'm saying instead, when this post is created, just go ahead and publish it right away. When the result comes back after the run's created, I'm getting some of its data. I'm saying for that run, I want the author, node, user fields, and then total miles. So this would be after that run has been added. Now give me that user's new total miles count back. Because using that, I can determine whether or not they've earned the next badge or medal. All right, so I have some styles right here. That's what takes our regular form and just applies some styles to it to create a new styled form component there. And let's see. So let's finish talking about the submission stuff real quick. So we talked about handle submit. That's what actually fires off create run. Once that response comes back, I have this use effect that handles it. So you can see it says handle successful run creation. So this one says if we don't have any data yet, just bail out. This use effect, I don't want it to do anything if that's the case. Otherwise, if we make it past this check, that means our query to the backend to create this run has actually completed and we have data available. So I'm doing some data processing here. I'm saying for the data that came back and for the create run mutation, get this value inside of it. Run, author, node, user fields, and then finally total miles. That would be that person's new total miles right there. Then I have a little check, has user already earned? Likewise, this one I can pass an award, and that'll answer the question, has the user not yet earned that badge? So what I do then is take all the awards and I filter it twice. I filter it once to say, has the user not yet earned this badge? I filter it again to say, has the user, the first filter is, has the user not already earned it? And the second filter is, has the user not yet earned it? So what you get at the end of the day, if you take all awards and you take away all those they've already earned and those they have not yet earned, what you're left with is just those that they have earned this time around for this particular request. So that's how I do this check. I say, did the user earn an award? So if the awards earned filtering that we did, if that has a length at all, if there's even one award that they earned in that array, then we know that they did indeed earn it. So then I'm doing different things depending on if they earned it or not. So let's say they didn't. Let's skip this block and say they did not earn anything new. So in that case, I'm playing a Mario coin sound. I'm adding a toast notification where I have a random success message, and then I'm programmatically navigating them back to the main runs list page. So there's some fun stuff here, I think. So let's first take a look at the play Mario sound right here. So this comes from this hook I created called use sounds. So this is pretty fun in my opinion. So I'll go to the use sounds hook and we'll take a look at that. So in my project, I have a hooks directory right here and then a use sounds custom hook that I built. And this uses a library by Josh Como called use sound, which is pretty cool. As the name suggests, you can just give it some like MP3 files, and then anywhere in your React app, you can trigger those sound effects to happen. Obviously, on the web, you want to be like tasteful about this. You don't want like auto playing sound the user didn't ask for as soon as the page loads, that kind of thing. But these are for like little tasteful sound effects here and there in the application. So I decided this library is a ton of fun, and I wanted to use it for my project. So that's where use sound comes from. And you can see I have just a few sounds in my project. So if I go to here, the sounds folder, I have a couple MP3s. I have applause, fanfare, the Mario coin sound, and then pop down, another one. So for this, I'm creating some React context and then creating a sounds provider. I'm calling the use sounds hook, and I'm passing into it, all four of those sounds. And then using those four functions, I just pass all four of those down as the value for my sounds context provider right here. And then lastly, I just have a use sounds hook. So if I go to Gatsby browser here, you'll see all the providers that I'm wrapping my app with. So one of these lets the app know about the current network status, if we're online or offline. One of them is my Apollo provider, so that anywhere inside of my app, I'm able to run GraphQL queries and mutations. The auth provider that passes down, whether or not the user is authenticated. So I pass that down. This is for toast notifications, which we'll see next. And this is that sounds provider that we just looked at a moment ago. So this allows me to play any of those sounds. Let's talk now about if they had earned an award though. So I play two sounds at the same time. So you can see right after the other, I'm playing applause, which is just like a crowd, clapping, that kind of noise. And then fanfare is somewhat similar, but there's like a little trumpet sound in addition to that. So I play both of those at the same time just for like some cheering, a little sound effect. I display a toast notification that says, you won a new award, congratulations, like that. And then I'm navigating them somewhere different. So award to navigate to is this one. So out of all the awards they've earned, figure out what the last one is. Another thing I think that would be interesting to see is this use refetch queries. I decided to stick this functionality in a hook because I would need it in multiple places. So like if the user adds a run right here, then you need to do a few things. I need to refetch and re-render the total miles. I need to refetch and re-render the list of runs right here because it'll show their new one at the top. And I also need to refresh some leaderboard data. So like whichever these groups they're a part of, as well as their age group right here, those need to be refetched as well whenever a change happens. Likewise, all of those different things would also need to be refreshed if the user deletes a run like that. So I decided having all of those, that query refetching, to have all of that in a single like hook that I can easily call from anywhere in the app would be really helpful. So that's what I did. I created this use refetch queries. So let's take a look at that real quick. And you can see what this does. So this calls our use auth hook to figure out who is this user, and it grabs their ID. And then you can see it returns this array of things that we need to refetch. So we're saying our total miles query, Apollo client, you're going to need to refetch that now that changes have been made. We need to refresh the user's list of runs now that they've added a new run. So you'll need to refetch this query as well. You'll need to refetch the leaderboard counts for the user's age group, and then the leaderboard counts for the user's sex as well. So those 4 queries right there, and it returns an array of all 4 of those. So if we head back here, we can see how that's used. So I'm calling use refetch queries, and I'm getting that big array of queries to refetch, and then passing that right in to Apollo here. So that makes it really easy. Like I said, in other places in the app where I need to refetch all 4 of those same queries, I can do the same thing. I can just pop open some curly braces and then pass that in and call it a day. So that's about it for the add run form. Let's take a look at deletion real quick. So that would be, again, like my cards that I have right here. If somebody hits the X, then they get a toast to confirm that change. So let's do that. We'll start off on the runs page. So again, just as a reminder, the runs page has this runs list. So click on that to jump to it. And the runs list looks like this. We've seen this before. There's our infinite scroll component, but we haven't looked at this though. So the individual run cards like this. Let's click through to those. So run just looks like this. So what are we doing in this file? So we have some styles going on, and we're pulling in miles, and then the run delete button. So that's the X that they need to click, and they're rendering. Each one of those is a list item like that, and we're just displaying it's like date and miles right there. So here's the delete run button that gets rendered right there. So you take a look at that real quick. So this delete run button looks like this. We're saying use mutation, and then we have this delete run mutation that looks like this. And I didn't do any customization here. This is the delete mutation that WPGraphQL provides. Whenever you activate WPGraphQL on your site, you get some mutations for free for some of your post types, including one to delete, those post types. So I'm calling delete run, and I'm just passing in like the appropriate ID for the post to be deleted. All right, so I'm saying that's the query I want to use, and then refetch queries. We talked about that a moment ago. So whenever you make this change, here are the queries that you need to refetch in the app just to make sure all that data is fresh. And then I'm calling that function to perform the mutation delete run right there. So you can see here I have just a button, and then on click I have this handle X click, which is this function here. So that would be this button. If they click that, then it calls handle X click, which is this. That's a div that says delete run ? With a button to handle with a function called handle confirmation click right here. And I'm calling add single toast, as you can see, which makes it display as a toast notification. So when they click that, then they get my markup displaying inside of the button. And let's trace this now. If they do click that delete button to confirm that they do indeed want to delete that run, that then calls this function. So we're doing a few things. We're displaying a toast notification saying deleting run, so they know we're working on it. We're firing off that delete run mutation that we saw a moment ago, and we're passing into it the info it needs to delete that particular run, and saying then when that resolves, then display a toast notification that says run deleted. So again, to see that again, our 50 miler will remove. So if I go to delete, and then I can confirm this one, I get deleting, and then ultimately run deleted like that. And then you can see everything has refreshed. That should be refreshed because of this, because we're calling our refetch queries there. Let's check out that timeline. For this page, I was able to actually find a timeline React component that somebody used and open sourced. That was perfect. I was able to just drop it into my project. So let's take a look at that. So inside of templates, I have timeline right here. So this one, again, it takes that that data that we fetched at build time on Netlify servers, and that gets passed down into this timeline page. We're taking that and destructuring the awards off of it and passing those through to this timeline component right here as a prop. So our timeline component looks like this. So at the top, you can see I'm using this React vertical timeline component. I was able to find this on NPM, and this library worked out really well for my project. So here's our timeline component. I'm calling the use total miles hook to grab a few things there. And so yeah, if we're loading or an error, display one of those. Otherwise, if we have the data that we need to work with, go ahead and render the rest of the page right here. So you can see I'm using from NPM that vertical timeline React component that I'm given. I'm using that, and I'm mapping over each of my awards here and displaying this. And now, admittedly, this is like, I could have broken this out probably into another component right here for the individual awards, but this works just as well. So for each award, I'm pulling some data off of that. I'm destructuring the award to pull off this stuff. I'm figuring out if it's a medal right here versus if it's a badge, and then if the person has earned it. And then I'm displaying each item in my timeline like this. So you can see I'm saying if there is a featured image, then we're going to display this. And if the user has also earned it, then display the actual link to that award page and make it and display the responsive image right there so that they can click through. They can click on this and actually go to the single page. And because they've earned it, we're also going to go ahead and display the title for that thing as well as the content for that thing. All right. Let's say that's not the case, though. If the user has not earned it, then we would do the other case right here, which is we'd render a responsive image, but we'd apply a class of not earned. So that uses some CSS like filtering stuff to give it that kind of teaser grayed out look like this. So you can kind of make out the shape, but not actually see. You can see some of the definition, some of the lines poking through right there a little bit. So you get that little teaser, and then they just get a bunch of question marks and not yet earned for the title right there and for the paragraph tag. So this timeline component, will re-render if any of this stuff changed. If the user has now earned a badge that they hadn't earned before or whatever, all this would be re-rendered, and it would show the details for that particular award rather than the mysterious question marks and not yet earned and grayed out image and stuff like that. And the last tab we have in the app is the leaderboard right here. So this is the one where it displays all of the totals that all of our athletes, have racked up, and you can find your own name and see, where you rank, and try to work your way, up through the ranks and be, the person who's leading the group. So let's take a look at that now. All right, so I'm saying, so I'm capturing in state what the age group that they're currently viewing is. So I'm saying, my age group or all female or all male. So that just keeps track of this state here for which one of these they have currently selected, and then based on that view, which one of those three it is, then we pass down that info into a few of these different components. So the keyboard or the leaderboard switcher, which is this component here, we pass in what all of the views are, what the current view is, and then also the mechanism to update that, to set the view right here. So we can see that. That's a pretty simple, set of radio buttons right there. They're styled to look like kind of a horizontal switcher component right there. And then when the user clicks any of those, we just call that the handle change function right there, which plays a little pop down sound and also performs the change. So called set view and sets it to that new thing. And then we also have the leaderboard itself right there. This is what this component looks like. So you can see what we're doing here. I'm using useauth and finding out who the current user is, and then doing a little light data processing here. I'm saying is this the my age group view? Figuring that out. And then if it is, use the user's sex, otherwise use, whatever view we're on. And likewise for age group, if the user is viewing their own, use their age group, otherwise set that to null because we're going to get all age groups. Like for these tabs over here, we're not going to limit it to a certain age group. So once I do that, then I'm calling this use leaderboard function. I'm passing in those details right there, and I'm getting the data that Apollo Client gives me back, and also my loading and error states. And this use leaderboard is right here, so we can check out this hook. So it looks like this. You can see I am using Apollo's use query, and I'm passing in the get leaderboard query right there, and passing through to it, the details about like the data I want to fetch. And yeah, there are the variables being passed through. I'm saying if we have data, then great. Do some light, formatting of that data to get into the format I want, and set that as the leaderboard, and then return that. If the data did come back, but there's no length, meaning no one has logged any runs, then I just display a message like no results yet. Get out there and run some miles, like that. Otherwise, if we make it to this point and we actually have users to display on the list, then I'm taking that leaderboard data and mapping over it and saying for each age group, pull off of that, what is this age group, its label, and all of its runners inside of it. So that would be like this age group, and then the label for that, and then all the runners inside of it. And then you can see I'm looping over each of the runners and saying, render this leaderboard row. So that'd be each individual row like that. So you can glance at that real quick. So there's a component that looks like this. Miles, it looks like I made that its own components, and then I have some styles that get applied to each list item like that. And then here's the component. So I'm taking the props passed in and just destructuring those to pull off the person's user ID or database ID right there, first name, last name, and then some of their ACF fields. So their city, state, and then their total miles right there. And it's just playing a styled list item right there with that person's first and last name concatenated. So just like that. And then their city and state below that, kind of with the grade all caps text right there. And then lastly, their miles. So I think that's about it in terms of the functionality for this front end application. Hopefully you thought that was cool, getting a little tour of the front end Gatsby and React app for this. Next, we'll take a look at the WordPress backend though and see how this is wired up there. So here I have the backend loaded up on my local. And let's just as a reminder, let's take a look at the plugins that we have in place here. So advanced custom fields, WP Gatsby, WPGraphQL, and also the JWT auth and text query plugins that go along with WPGraphQL, and WPGraphQL for advanced custom fields that adds the ACF fields to the GraphQL schema so that you're able to query for those from your front end app. So that's what we're using. We'll dive into this though, the run through history core plugin. This is where all the bespoke, custom functionality for this app exists. So we'll look into that. Even before we do that, though, let's talk about the theme real quick. So the question may, occur to you: what theme do you even use for a headless WordPress app? Because we're not using the front end to display anything. And in fact, if you try to visit the front end here for my app, you'll get redirected to the actual headless front end. So I'll show you just the simple kind of placeholder theme I have here called Headless WordPress, and I'll dive into that custom plugin. So here in the backend code, if I go to WP content themes, I have this Headless WP theme right here, and this is a simple placeholder theme basically that I wrote. So it's up on GitHub. Like if you're interested in using this for any of your projects, it exists here. So it's on my GitHub, just called Headless WordPress theme right here, and the README just tells you like how to use it. That basically has this as a blank style.css, just with the headers that WordPress requires right there. The screenshot just is the WordPress logo, like that. This README is what I showed a moment ago on the GitHub repo that just tells you kind of how to use this headless WordPress placeholder theme if you want to use it for yourself. And then it has 2 other files to it. So pretty darn bare bones. So if you don't do anything else, if all you do is activate this theme, then it'll use this index.php for every single page requests for the front end. So just display a link right here to the WordPress admin. And actually, I think I've updated the repo to rather than just display a link, I'm displaying a proper like HTML page right here. And then functions.php does something a bit different. So if you choose to display a front-end app URL or define a front-end app URL constant somewhere in your project, and we know what the front-end URL is for like your headless app, in that case, then when the template redirect hook is run by WordPress, then we'll call WP redirect and send the user to that front-end URL. So that's kind of a choice you have to make if you use this little placeholder theme. You can either choose not to define that constant and just let this render out, so the user just sees a link to the admin, or otherwise, if you choose to define that constant, then it'll just automatically be redirected to your front end app instead. So you can do kind of one of those 2 behaviors, whatever you think is better for your application. So that's what I have just for my placeholder theme to satisfy WordPress and get something in place for that. Let's dive into plugins though. So here's the list of plugins, and the one I want to focus on is run through history right here. So I have my plugin headers at the top, and then a single add action that kicks everything off. So this is a simple bootstrap file right here that gets everything running, and then all the functionality for the plugin is inside of the source directory. So everything here is inside of this plugins loaded callback function right here, and it grabs the composer auto load files from inside of the vendor directory right there. And you can also define a array of dependencies here for this plugin, and it'll check to see if all of those exist before loading up the plugin. So you can say, here are my dependencies. I need the composer autoload files, and I need WPGraphQL. And if you have any other plugins that are critical to your project that this plugin depends on, you can define those there if you want. I'm using a few array methods here to determine which dependencies are missing from that list, if any. And then for saying if dependencies are missing, display an admin notice in WordPress and return early. So you can see I'm saying if dependencies are missing, then call add action and hook to admin notices with this function, which is defined above here. So it has access to the missing dependencies, and it displays this admin notice in the WordPress admin. So I can show you what that looks like real quick. That looks like this. So my project depends on WP GraphQL. So if I deactivate that, for instance, I'll get this. So a few other plugins are doing similar things, as you can see, similar checks. But this is the one that our plugin is generating. So the run through history core plugin can't be loaded because these dependencies are missing, WP GraphQL. It's just bailing early because of this return statement right here. So all it's doing at this point is just rendering the admin notice message and then returning early. It's not actually loading up any other code, just because we depend on having WP GraphQL active. So let's activate that again, and our messages should go away. So there we go. So if we make it past that check, then if we're not missing dependencies, then we'll do this: require once all of our composer autoload files for our project, and then we'll instantiate this main run through history class, which is inside of our source directory. And that's kind of the main class for the whole application. So before we dive into that though, I'll just mention that this plugin boilerplate is also on my GitHub, in case you're interested in that at all. So if I go to my own GitHub, go to repositories, and we'll go to, so it's WordPress plugin boilerplate. So that's what this is. It uses a PSR4 autoloader, displays a WordPress admin notice, and doesn't run when dependencies are missing. So that's the thing that we just saw a moment ago. Provides a hookable interface that all classes with action or filter hooks can implement. So we'll see that in a moment. And then just has the steps to use, like clone it down and just do a few, search and replaces of a few string literals right there. And then, you'd be up and running to use this plugin boilerplate yourself if you'd like to as well. So back to the plugin here. Let's say we're not missing dependencies and we're going to go ahead and require all the files, PHP files for this project, as well as instantiate the main run through history class. So let's take a look at what that looks like now. If I go to that file, it looks like this. So I'm saying this is our main namespace we're calling run through history, and here's the final class for run through history. So we're doing a few things here. So we're setting up an empty instances array right there as a class property. And then here's that run method that we saw a moment ago. So the main bootstrap file, it instantiates run through history and then calls that run method. So when that is called, this is what executes. It first calls create instances and then register hooks. So we'll take a look at those real quick. So create instances does this. It just instantiates any of the classes that I want to be instantiated from inside of these directories here, and then adds them to the instances array right there. So after this code executes, what we're left with is that instances array that has keys with these names, and then the values for each of those are all of the instances for each of our classes right here. And I'm doing some dependency injection here as well. So like this roles registrar class, it actually needs to know about, it needs to have access to some of these other instances on the list. So what I do is I just pass all of the instances into roles registrar, so then it can just do a quick like filter to find like the instances that it needs access to, and then perform whatever functionality it needs to. And I'm also passing it into this user register class right here. All right, so after that happens, we end up with, like I said, our instances array right here with all of the class instances inside of it. So once that's done, then we finally call register hooks. So that's this function. It calls this get hookable instances and loops over each of those and calls a register hook method. All right, and how you may ask yourself, like, well, how do I know every single one of these instances that I'm getting here has a method, with this name that we can just straight up loop over them and call every single one? And that's because because I'm applying this array filter right here, and that is taking all of the instances and filtering them to pull out only the ones that are an instance of interfaces hookable. So let's take a look at that. So if I go to in my project interfaces and then hookable, this is a simple interface that just says, any class that implements this has a method called register hooks, and that method is for registering hooks with WordPress. So that's what happens here. Taking all the instances, filtering out only the ones that are hookable, and then returning that value. So then once I have only the hookable ones, I'm looping over those and calling register hooks. So then any of these classes I instantiated right here, any of them that are hookable, that have WordPress hooks to be registered, I'm going ahead and doing that and calling register hooks right there. So that's kind of how the plugin bootstrapping and then also the main plugin class work out here. From here, I thought we could kind of go through some of these folders and pick off what might be interesting details. So we can look at. We'll start simple. We'll just go to the admin folder right here. So I have a class called admin menu customizer. So here's one of those register hooks that I mentioned, and this class implements hookable so that we know it has some hooks that need to be registered, and then we go ahead and call add action. So when the admin menu hook fires, I'm calling it customize admin sidebar, and then removing posts, pages, and then comments, just to clean things up a little bit, just because I didn't, we're not using those post types for this project. We're only using some of our custom ones like awards and runs. So I'm just doing a little like cleanup of the admin sidebar right there. I also have this admin access class right here. So this is another hookable class. It hooks to admin init and calls this log out and redirect non-admins function. So I have some users on the site are admins, like myself when I log in. Others on the site have a user role of runner. So for those folks, like, I don't want them to ever be able to access the WordPress backend. As you've seen, I have all the authentication stuff that they might need to do. is all in the front end app. So they can manage their account from there. They have no reason to log into the WordPress backend. So I just have this little check to make sure that that's the case. So I'm saying if this is an admin user, then do nothing. You let WordPress function as it usually does and allow the person to log in. Otherwise, if we make it past this check, we know this person has a different user role. They're not an admin. So if that ever happened, if the user is trying to log in, I just log them out immediately and then send them to the front end app. So it says if a front end app URL is set, send the non-admin user there. Otherwise, send them back to the admin login page. And here again is that front end app URL that we saw once before. It's supposed to be, let me show you where that is. So if I go to my WP config file right here where my constants are defined, that would be here, front end app URL, just like that. Yeah, so that's it for the admin folder. Let's take a look at some of these other ones. So email, this one is worth looking at because I had to do some custom things to allow WordPress to work in a headless environment for doing the password resets and stuff like that. So we'll take a look at that. So email settings. So right here, I'm filtering a few things. I'm saying on the WP email from filter, do this instead. So I'm saying, so by default, WordPress does, when it sends emails, it sends them from WordPress at whatever your domain is. So I'm just customizing that and saying info at my site name instead, just because I like that naming a bit better. I'm also customizing the from address. Let's see. So that was the from address there, and then the from name would be here. So I'm doing something similar. I'm just saying, when the email gets sent, instead of saying it was from WordPress, instead grab the name of our WordPress site, which is run through history, and then call a function to make sure we're decoding that and it's in the right format. So when emails are sent, it'll say it's from run through history instead, just to customize that a bit further. I'm also, so these remaining ones are all related to doing password resets and auth stuff. So when the user retrieve password title, on that hook I'm calling modify email reset subject. All right, so when the user is performing a password reset, I'm saying, grab the site name, which is run through history, and then append to that dash password reset. So when the email is sent, that's the subject line. Here's the retrieve password message now. I'm also customizing that. So for that, I'm displaying this message. So a password reset has been requested for the following site name account. So for me, that would be run through history account. And it just displays, the user's email right there. If you did not request, you can safely ignore. And then it says you can reset your password here. And it, I call this function and pass in the special unique key that the user is going to need to have to reset the password, and also the person's login. And I have this little helper function here that takes, their login, it URL encodes that, grabs our front end app URL so that it knows what that is, and then builds the URL here. So this is a key part of the app. When the user goes to reset their password, they go to check their email, this is the link that'll be included in their email. So it'll be, whatever the front end app URL is, and then /set password. And then we have some URL query string parameters here. We have the key equals the unique key that they need to identify or to perform the reset, and then also whatever their user login is. So that's how we build the whole URL right there, and tack on an additional parameter if it's a new account, and ultimately return that URL. So when the user requests a password reset, this is the language that I'm choosing to send, to the front end. And then when the URL is presented there, I have my custom URL being sent. And this is really important. If I didn't have this in place, then when the user requested a password reset, WordPress would send the link, the URL that it usually does, which would send the user to where the WordPress site lives. It would send them to your WordPress backend to perform the reset there. So in my case, I didn't want that. I want everything, all user interactions I want going through, and being managed inside of my front end app right here. So I think we've been through most of these except the last one here. So modify new user notification email. Let me see what we're doing for that. So I just customized this one. So instead of the standard message that WordPress sends with the URL to where the WordPress site lives, instead I'm sending a custom message with the URL to my front end decoupled front end application. So that email stuff is super important for a lot of the authentication related stuff, like I said, new user signups and also password resets. Skip interfaces for now. We'll touch on that later. Let's check out media right here. So featured images, not too much there. I'm just hooking to after setup theme and adding support for featured images. And that's because for my awards post type, as we've seen, I'm using the featured images right here to display those. Here's my post types. So I have two of them. I have the run post type and then award post type. So we can look at each of these. On init, I'm calling this register method right here and calling register post type. And I'm just doing the usual WordPressy stuff. I'm saying I'm supporting the title and author in the case of the run post type here. And then these are really important here. So if you read the WPGraphQL documentation, you'll see that for any custom post type that you want to expose in the GraphQL schema, you need to do this. You need to say show in GraphQL true, and you need to tell it what the single and plural names should be when it gets added to the GraphQL schema. So you can see for me, I'm saying that for the single name, use this self GraphQL single name, just like that. So it's capital R run. And then for the plural name, use runs right there. So you might have noticed that I'm using some class constants right here to define the key for this custom post type, as well as the GraphQL single name. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can easily reference these in other places in my app, so that I'm not like hard coding them in 1,000 different places, and making it so that if there's a typo in even one of those places, my app would break, or if they didn't match up in all those places, my app would break. This way I just have a single source of truth. So what I mean by that is like anywhere in my app where I need to access the run post type, I can just do like the run post type class, : key, just like that. All right, so that was the run post type. Award post type is very similar. There's register post type, does similar stuff. And then I'm also using the class constants for the key and GraphQL single name. I do have this post type label utility though. So you might have noticed the use statement I have at the top of both of these post type classes. I have a trait called post type label utility. So that's in the same folder right here. So this is a PHP trait right here that just has one protected function called generate labels. So this is just a helper method. You can say, you can pass into it whatever the singular label is, whatever the plural label is, and then any additional ones that you might want to tack on in addition to this list. And then it'll return to you this pre-generated list of all the labels. It'll just build those for you. So any post types that want to be able to generate labels, for them, they can just call use post type label utility, and as long as they've done that, then it's safe for them for the labels to go ahead and call this arrow generate labels and just pass in a singular and plural, and then call it a day. So that's it for my post types. Let's take a look at taxonomies on the site. So award type taxonomy, that one we've talked about. So for my award post type, I want to be able to distinguish what's a badge from what's a medal. And for this one, I have a few class constants as well. So I'm saying the key for this thing is award underscore type. And for each of the terms, I'm actually hard coding these. So I'm saying the badge term is badge, the medal term is medal. So my two terms like that. I'm just hard coding what those need to be in these class constants. And then I'm going to make sure they exist actually as soon as my app boots up for the first time. So I'm hooking into init, and I'm saying I want to call this register function right here, which calls register taxonomy. And then similar to my post types, we have a generate labels trait. We have this trait here with the generate labels utility on it. So we can call that to generate our labels, and that gets included right there inside of this class. So we have that, and then we're passing through. We're also saying we want to expose this taxonomy in GraphQL, and then we're giving it what the single name and plural names should be right there. So that's what actually renders, or that's what actually registers our taxonomy right here. And you notice I'm also hooking into admin init and then saying ensure terms exist. So for this one, I'm saying as soon as the WordPress admin boots up for the first time ever, like if this plugin has just been activated for the very first time and we're just loading up the admin on the next page load after plugin activation, then this will run. It'll call WP count terms and pass to it the key for this taxonomy, and it'll get the number of terms. I'm just saying if the terms isn't 2, if it's anything else, then go ahead and call create terms, and that just calls WP insert term to insert badge and metal, and then for each of them it uses those hard-coded strings right here. So badge and metal. So it just goes ahead and creates those. I wanted to do that just to make sure these exist 100% of the time. So then, if I ever reuse this code base anywhere else and the decoupled front-end app is trying to query for the badge and metal terms or whatever, they just always exist. I have that guarantee that, those two terms will always be there. So that's what that looks like. All right, after that, I have a few user taxonomies. I mentioned once earlier in the video that user taxonomies, like WordPress from a technical standpoint, does support them, but they're not really like first-class citizens. If you register a user taxonomy, you won't get any screens in the WordPress admin for managing those, and it won't even recalculate the term count and things like that for these. So bear that in mind as we're looking through some of this stuff. So I have this, so I have the age group taxonomy right here. So I have a few traits that I'm pulling in here. So I have a taxonomy label utility, which we've seen once already. I have user taxonomy count updater and the user taxonomy term updater as well. So these are things that WordPress doesn't do for you for user taxonomies. You have to do yourself. So we'll take a look at those in a moment. So for this user age group taxonomy, I'm registering a few hooks here. So I'm hooking to the init hook here, and I'm saying that the callback function is register right here. So it calls register taxonomy and then passes in some pretty standard stuff right here. I'm using that generate labels helper method that my utility class provides, the taxonomy label utility one that we talked about before. Let's see. Just like with our post types, these are of course important. I'm saying yes, expose it in the GraphQL schema, providing this plural and single name right there. Next one is ensure terms exist. So similar with a few of our others, I'm just saying the very first time this app loads up, when admin init first fires, go ahead and call this function. I'm just saying if there aren't 8 terms already, go ahead and create all of them. So here they are. You can see I have just the human readable text right there. And then for each of those, I'm just saying for this taxonomy right here, here's the slug. And I'm passing in just these constants right here. So that's create terms. And then after that is render profile fields right here. So this, again, is something that WordPress doesn't do for you for user taxonomies. So you have to kind of roll your own. So that would be here in the WordPress admin. If I go to my own profile page and then I scroll down, we have the age group and then the sex taxonomies right here with radio buttons displayed. So that's what this does. It just grabs what the current terms are for each of those, and then displays whatever the heading is. If there are no terms, you get a message saying there are none. Otherwise, if we do have terms, it goes ahead and just loops over each of those and displays the list of radio buttons. And for each one of those that we actually do have the term set for this particular user, it just shows it as the selected item right there as being checked. So that's it for user age group taxonomy. Although, if you've been counting, we haven't accounted for all of our callbacks actually. So this save terms right here, if you look in this class, you won't find it, and that's because save terms is coming from this one, user taxonomy term updater and then we have count updater as well. So we can take a look at these. So count updater just looks like this. So we have this update term count function right there. And we can find where that is. Yeah, so I'm saying for this particular taxonomy, when a term is either added or removed, here is the custom callback function that we want to run to recalculate those terms. So I'm passing in that function. So that just does some work to recalculate what the count is for that taxonomy. And then the other one is that save terms is actually hooked to, would be this one, user taxonomy term updater. So this is another trait right here that's used in a few places in the app. So this one just provides a single save terms method right here. So it receives what the user ID is, and then ultimately is responsible for saving that. For the user sex taxonomy, it's really the same as age group. You can see I'm doing exactly the same things. I'm just registering what it is. I'm saying the terms that exist are up here. I'm rendering the profile fields that exist, and then calling the same exact save terms method. We can keep rolling here. The next one I have is user meta setters. So we'll talk about those here. Before we do that though, let's take a quick break to look at our ACF custom fields. So I have total miles, date of birth, and then city and state. So that would be just like we saw on the profile page. That would be these 4 fields right here. And if you recall from earlier, I said that the total miles, I recalculate this every time there's a change. So every time a run is either added or removed by the user, we go ahead and sweep through all of their runs and then recalculate the total and reset this so that it's always ready for us to pull that total value for the user, and it's always kept up to date. So that's what the setters are about right here. So I have age group setter and then total miles setter. So we'll talk about total miles first, since that's what I just mentioned. So this class gets it's a hookable class, so it gets automatically called. The register hooks method here gets called when the app boots up and registers a few hooks right here. So I'm hooking to user register. So I'm saying when a user is first registered, like if they're signing up to be a new user for our app, then initialize total miles. So I'm saying, for this particular user and for the total miles meta key, initialize that to 0, just so I know that it's set to an integer as soon as they become a user on the site, like that. And then I'm doing a few other things. So I'm saying on save post, call set user total miles, and also on deleted post, same thing, call set user total miles. So you can take a look at that here. So it says recalculate and set a user's total miles whenever they create, update, or delete a run. So this one you can see it just receives whatever the post ID is for the changed run. If the post that was passed in isn't a run, I'm bailing early. Otherwise, I'm continuing here. And you may ask, let's just keep rolling here. So if it's not a run, I'm bailing out here, as I said. Otherwise, if we make it past this check, then we know we're dealing with a run post here. So I'm saying, get post field, post author to find out, who submitted this run, and then I'm calling this recalculate method right here. And whatever it comes back with is the person's new total, and that's what I'm using to call update user meta and reset this value right here to that person's new total. Next one is age group setter. So I mentioned once before that the user doesn't actually set this age group. We just set it for them. Once we know their date of birth and they're registering for the site, we just figure out what the age group should be and select that for them. So that's what this class is responsible for. So I'm hooking to profile update and then calling this set method right here, and you can kind of see what it is meant to do. So it just calls get user meta, and it gets the person's date of birth. You can see here that I just have a series of ifs. So I'm saying if the age we calculated is less than 10, then set the person's term to the term 0 to 10 for the age group taxonomy, and then bail since we're done doing our work. Otherwise, if it's below 20, then set it to 10 to 20. Otherwise 30, do that, 40, do that, and so on. User roles, I don't think we've looked at this. So I have one custom role right here, and then I have a roles registrar class that handles both removing WordPress's built-in roles as well as registering the one custom one. So this might be somewhat interesting to look at here. Let me see what runner role. So runner role is pretty darn simple. You can see it just implements this user role interface that we have right here. And that interface just says that, you have to have this method called register, and that is used to register that particular user role. So because we implement that, we know that this class has to have a public method with that name. And then when it's called, I'm calling WordPress's add role function right there. And I'm saying, here's the name of it, and defining that as a class constant right here. Just giving it a human readable name, and then defining what capabilities that user role should have. So that's it for runner role. Like I said, though, we'll head back to roles registrar, and this does a bunch of things. It not only calls runner role to register this, but also removes the built-in roles, like I said. So let's take a quick look at this. This does a few things. So before we even get to register hooks down here, let's just take a look at a few things. So in the constructor right here, it receives all of the instances for our whole WordPress custom plugin here for our run through history application. It receives all of the instances right here, and you can see that it runs an array filter, and it filters out only the ones that are an instance of user role. So for us, that would only be the user role right here. This is the only one for our project. I have other projects though where I use a similar pattern to this, and they might have 4, 5, 6, whatever user roles. So this filter works great to pull out just the instances that we care about, that are the ones representing new user roles. So we do that, and then we just set this class property right here, roles, to the ones that we know we're going to need to register. And then register hooks is called when our app boots up. So I'm hooking to the init hook and saying I want to call this maybe register roles function right here. So it does a check. It says if should roles be set, then proceed with doing all this stuff here. So we don't want to do this on every single request made to the server, just because that would be expensive, and there's no reason to do this if things have changed. If you look up WordPress documentation on setting user roles, you'll often see people suggesting doing it on plugin activation. That's when you would register roles and set new capabilities and stuff like that. I'm not crazy about that though, just because if the plugin is ever if that activation hook isn't run for some reason, then the capabilities aren't registered. Or if you make any changes, let's say the plugin has been activated for a while, and now you make a tweak to some of the capabilities, that your activation hook isn't going to run again. You would have to deactivate and then reactivate the plugin just for those to go live. So I have a system here that I use instead, where I just hard code a version number here. So it says custom roles version number. Bump this number if you have made any permissions changes and need the roles to be re-registered. So I know that in my app, if I ever go into the user role right here and I tweak something, I add any kind of permissions, make any change whatsoever to one of my user roles, I know, all right, I can just pop into this file and increment this to 2, and that's it. And then just commit my change, knowing that the next time this check runs, should roles be set, and that'll evaluate to true. So that just looks like this. I'm saying get this option from the database, RTH custom roles version right there. So I pull that out of the database and just compare it with, the hard-coded version in this class. I'm saying if the one we have in the database is less than the one in this class, then we'll know, oh, it's been incremented. We better, reset our roles. We better do all the stuff inside of this if block. So when that's the case, we proceed with removing the roles. So you can see I call remove role editor, author, contributor, subscriber. So just those built-in WordPress roles I don't use for this app. I leave admin though, the administrator role, because I do use that for myself as well as my friends who run the race company. They all of us are admins, so I do use that, but remove these other ones. After that's done, I call register roles right here. So that one loops over all of the roles that need to be set. And for each of those, it calls the register method. And remember, I know that all of those have a method called register because all of them implement that interface called user role that we saw right over here. So I do that to get all of them registered, which for this app is just the runner role. And the very last thing is to call update option, and then it updates this RTH custom roles version and sets it to be equal with the current version that we've hard coded in this class. So that next time we run this check right here, the two will be equal. So we'll know that no changes have been made, and can just bail out early as soon as this check is made right here. So that's how I have my roles system working. Like I said, I think it's a good setup because then you can just make any changes while your app is already live and just bump this number, knowing that WordPress will re-register things the very next request that comes in. In this folder, we'll pay particular attention to this WPGraphQL folder because this is where we're actually making some customizations to the GraphQL schema to make it work the way it needs to for our app. So we can take a little tour through some of these. So let's see. What do you need to look at first? How about connections maybe? So for runs, yeah, this would be a good one. So for runs right here, you can see I'm hooking into this hook that WP GraphQL provides called GraphQL Post Object Connection Query Args right there, and I'm calling modify query args. So this one, I'm just making sure we're targeting the right field. So I'm saying if runs isn't the field name right here, then return those query args unchanged. If order by is already set, then leave it as is, return that. And otherwise, I'm just saying whenever a runs query is sent, I want to order by the date the run occurred rather than the published date. Doing something like this, where you're like changing the way the order in which things are queried across the board, like 100% of the time, you would just want to be careful with this, because your app, you may want to order it differently, in some cases or whatever. For my app though, I was fine doing this. So I just said if they haven't specified an order, just always set it to this, so that we get the runs listed in the date according to the date that they actually ran that run. Let's take a look at users right here. So this one, I'm hooking into the WP GraphQL register types hook right here and calling register where input fields. So this is crucial. This means when we're querying for users, we can have it know about some additional input fields. We can say, we want the sex to be either limited to male or female, or we want the age group to be limited to, whatever the current user's age group is, if we want to drill down to that. So when we're running our queries, we now have new where arguments that we can include in the query to limit the results to those two things. And then the next method here is where we actually make use of those. So I'm hooking into this map input fields to WP user query. So this is before WP GraphQL runs a user query, I'm modifying the query fields first before that gets run. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm saying if no term slugs are provided, then just return the query args unchanged right there. Otherwise, if they, if we are querying based on one of these where arguments, then proceed to actually use those. But basically that one limits our query to just certain user IDs right there. And then we're saying if we don't have include, then go ahead and that means we're including no users at all. If we queried for a certain age group and no one has registered in that age group at all, then it's telling WordPress to include users who have a user ID of 0. Which, if you're familiar with WordPress, it starts counting at 1. So this means I'm guaranteeing we'll get no results back just by passing in 0 right there. Otherwise, I'm saying if users were found, then limit the results to those users. So I'm saying before our WP user query is run in the database, add an include argument to it, and then set that to the user IDs here that we got back, the ones that we want to limit it to right there, and ultimately return our query args. So that's how I wired this up. this could be done differently. Like instead of, doing some work here to figure out what the user IDs are and then running a WP query to limit those like that, you could instead do a custom database query where you're, querying for this data all at once using a custom WPDB query, for instance. In my test, though, like doing it like this, where I grab the IDs, pass them in here, and then quickly run the WP query, it was super, super fast. So I think this is kind of a cleaner way of doing it rather than messing around with custom queries if I don't have to. So that's how I got the filtering to work based on, the users like sex and age group when we're only querying for certain, groups of users like that. Let's talk mutations here. So this will be pretty cool. So I'll talk create run right here. So when I expose the run post type in WPGraphQL, I do get a mutation called create run, but I needed to save some extra data that WordPress doesn't natively know about. So I'm calling GraphQL register types, and similar to what we saw in one of the other classes, I'm registering some new input fields. So here I'm saying for that particular field, I'm going to register some GraphQL fields for that. Those are going to be the run date right here, and then miles. So after those input fields exist, I can go ahead and use those in the next two methods. So I'm hooking into this before resolve field and doing a little server-side validation here. So with this validate method, I'm just making sure we're targeting, the right query here. So we would run this check. We'd say if not is run date valid, then throw an error right here. So the user, we would fail gracefully on our front end React app and just display a red, error notice saying, oh, the run date is invalid. Sorry. We try our hardest to catch that on the client side so that they don't submit an invalid date in the first place, but just in case, I have some server side checking right here as well to make sure it's valid. Then we would proceed to this last one here. So I'm saying when a post object mutation is happening, I'm calling this update additional data hook here, and I'm hooking to it my save additional data method. So that's the last one in this file. It makes sure this is the create run mutation. As long as it is, we do some data processing right here. I'm ultimately saving two post meta fields. So I'm grabbing our sanitized and formatted metadate and saving that as post meta, and then our sanitized miles as well that were passed in and saving that as post meta for the miles. And then lastly, I'm just calling WP update post, and I'm saying update the post that was just saved and make this its title, so that it gets the whatever name dash whatever date like that. So that's how I'm using, how I'm setting those field values. And this is a common question. If you're getting started with WP GraphQL, I see people asking this. They think that if you use the WP GraphQL for Advanced Custom Fields plugin, that you get both the ability to query for ACF field values as well as update those values. But you don't. This plugin actually just allows you to query for ACF data. If you want to actually mutate those fields, then you have to do some work like this. You have to expose new input fields and then hook into an action, like this one, and then actually sanitize and save your additional data that came in. So that's how I'm saving that additional data when a run is created right here. I also have this user register mutation as well. It does similar things. So it gets passed in this the age group setter. So remember that we saw that class already. That's the one that is responsible for setting the user's age group after they register. For this one, I'm hooking into GraphQL register types, and then I'm registering some input fields. So these are used when the user is registering for the site. I'm also calling before resolve field, and I'm doing some validation, just like we saw with the create run class right here. So if we take a look at that, it looks like this. So it makes sure we're targeting the right mutation. If we are, I say if not is date of birth valid, then throw an error. You can see I'm doing a very similar check to the previous one. I'm just saying if I can parse the date that was passed in using string to time, then cool. Consider that a valid date that we can go ahead and use and ultimately save. So if we pass that validation, we hook to this and call save additional data. All right. So you notice a pattern here, right? This is very similar to the runs mutation, that we just looked at a moment ago. So this one, again, I'm doing some data processing right here. So I'm assuming this is the proper mutation that we're interested in targeting. At that point, I'm, parsing the data birth that was passed in right there, and then turning that into a string, sanitizing it, and then saving three things: saving the person's date of birth, their city, their state. And this is where I actually use their date of birth data to set the user's age group. So I'm using that age group setter that was passed in via dependency injection, just like that, and saved to this property. I'm using that to automatically set this person's age group using their date of birth. And then I set the sex term to whatever they chose when they registered as well. And that's how they get registered. So yeah, WordPress knows how to save some of that data, like when the user types in their first and last name and so on. I don't need any custom fields for those, of course, because WordPress has those natively. I just need kind of my custom ones here that I want to save in addition to those. Last one is the user object here. Let's take a look at what we're doing. So for this one, this is when we query for users. I'm saying, hey, WordPress, you already know about this type in the GraphQL schema called user, but I want to be able to pull 2 additional fields for that person. I want to be able to query for the sex that they selected when they registered. So grab that object term, and also for the age group that person is in. So pull that term as well, and then return that value to me. All right, so with that, I think we've wrapped up then. So you've heard the whole story of like where the app came from and why it was built and launched in the first place. I give you a tour of that app as though we were a user, clicking around, like logging our runs, deleting our runs, earning new badges and medals, stuff like that, and then seeing the leaderboard and where we rank. And then we dove into the code. So we took a look at the front end React and Gatsby app, saw how that is all wired up, and then also the WordPress backend to see how that functionality exists. So thanks a lot if you stuck with me till the end. Thanks so much for taking the time to check out this project. Hopefully this is like a cool case study to you, and it kind of shows you at least one example of like what can be done with the headless WordPress application. It inspires you to go on to build like really cool things yourself and launch some interesting projects. So thanks a lot. Did you like that? Go ahead and push that like button. Subscribe.